So the following lecture is strictly connected with our previous one, in the course of which we introduced various types of meanings and briefly discussed discourse markers as representatives of aorist conditional procedural meaning. And today I would like to concentrate on sentence adverbs and analyze them in terms of the type of meaning they represent. We'll start with the traditional classification of sentence adverbs, and here, as you can see, there appears the first category, that is illocutionary adverbials, such as frankly, confidentially, honestly, seriously. They are called illocutionary adverbials because they modify an implicit illocutionary verb. Frankly, I'm bored can be paraphrased as I tell you frankly that I'm bored. So frankly modifies the verb tell. Mary has confidentially failed the exam can be paraphrased as I inform you confidentially that Mary has failed the exam. So confidentially, as you can see, modifies the verb inform, so modifies the illocutionary verb. And finally, seriously, your argument is fallacious, can be paraphrased as I tell you seriously that your argument is fallacious. So again, seriously modifies the illocutionary verb, which is implicit in the case of the examples listed at the very beginning. Attitudinal adverbials constitute another category. So attitudinal adverbials such as unfortunately, happily, frankly or luckily. So as you see, they do not name a speech act, but indicate the speaker's attitude to the statement that he or she makes. Unfortunately, Mary has missed the deadlines, and the speaker finds it unfortunate that Mary has missed the deadline. Sadly, Paul's car was stolen. Again, in the speaker's opinion, it is sad that Paul's car was stolen. Happily, Bill was in time for the interview. Again, so this is the attitude of the speaker to the fact that Bill was in time for the interview. So again, they can be all paraphrased, and then we just say it is unfortunate that Mary has missed the deadline, but we cannot say I tell you unfortunately, which means that obviously unfortunately is not an illocutionary adverbial but attitudinal. We can say it is sad that Paul's car was stolen, but we cannot say I tell you sadly that Paul's car was stolen. It is happily true that Bill was in time, but obviously the sentence I tell you happily does not make sense here. Another category of sentence adverbs, evidential adverbials, words such as evidently, obviously or clearly, and they are claimed to indicate the strength of the speaker's evidence that he or she has for the statement that follows, the speaker's degree of commitment to the truth of the proposition. So we may say, evidently Bill has cheated in the exams, obviously the ball was over the line, clearly you are responsible for the damage. So they again can be paraphrased in the following way. It is evident, or it is evidently true that Bill has cheated in the exams. It is obvious that the ball was over the line. It is obviously true that the ball was over the line. It is clear or clearly true that you are responsible for the damage. So they simply indicate the strength of the speaker's evidence for the statement that follows. And finally, hearsay adverbials, the last category, words such as allegedly and reportedly. So they are considered to be a subcategory of evidentials because they also indicate that the source of knowledge is not the speaker herself but someone else. So they are used to report actual speech. So if I say allegedly the cook has poisoned the soup, I want to say that it is that piece of information does not come from me, that I'm not responsible for that, but that someone else has said that. Reportedly the ball was over the line. Again, I'm not the source of this particular piece of information. And we can paraphrase these sentences in the form of it is alleged that the cook has poisoned the soup. It is reported that the ball was over the line. Thus we have discussed 4 categories of sentence adverbs. illocutionary, attitudinal, evidential, and hearsay, and they have been treated as non-truth conditional in pragmatic literature, mainly within the Speech Act theory interpretation. So within the Speech Act theory, sentence adverbs are recognized or identified as linguistic devices that enable the speaker to make the force of the utterance explicit. All illocutionary acts can be performed if there is a conventional way of performing it, which means that there must be a formula or an indicator whose function is to indicate the performance of the act. So performative verbs are such illocutionary force markers, illocutionary force indicating devices. So are parenthetical constructions, so they again are illocutionary force signals. And sentence adverbs are considered to be more or less similar to performative verbs or to parenthetical constructions, so they are also treated as illocutionary force indicating device. If so, they do not contribute, they are believed not to contribute to the truth conditions of the utterance, because neither performative verbs nor parenthetical constructions are believed to be part of the truth conditional content. So they are treated in an analogous way. The function of illocutionary force indicating devices is to indicate the intention of the speaker, that is, the illocution. So they are expected to indicate that a particular utterance is a request for information, or an order, or a promise, or a warning, or an assertion, or a guess, or many other possible illocution. It can represent many other possible illocutions. Now, non-truth conditional expressions, in this case adverbials, are treated as indicating a speech act or propositional attitude rather than describing a state of affairs. So, for instance, if they modify an implicit verb, so we may say that they somehow represent this verb. So they simply are part of this illocutionary force indicating device. Now, illocutionary adverbials do not describe anything. They merely indicate what type of speech act is being performed. So if I say, frankly, I'm bored, frankly indicates the activity being performed, which is telling frankly, or admitting frankly, or informing the hearer frankly. So as you can see, each time it simply modifies the illocutionary verb. Now, if you look at the next sentence, which might be a bit ambiguous, seriously, is she coming? The theory of speech acts makes it possible somehow to account for the difference in meaning between I ask you seriously to tell me whether she's coming, and I ask you to tell me seriously whether she's coming. But whichever interpretation is selected, mind you that the adverb seriously modifies the verb. So it is the argument for the speech analysis of illocutionary adverbials. So it is always a modification of an illocutionary verb, in most cases implicit verb. But if so, then obviously they are non-truth conditional, or that should be treated as non-truth conditional. The interpretation of the attitudinal sentence adverbs may go along more or less the same lines. So the speech act account can somehow explain attitudinal adverbials. They indicate the propositional attitude the speaker intends to convey. So if we say luckily or happily and fortunately, and then a true statement, the proper statement follows, then the addressee gets as if two pieces of information. One is the statement proper, and the other is the attitude of the speaker towards the statement. Okay, so we may say that they do not somehow modify, they do not affect the statement that is embedded that follows them. So attitudinal adverbs modify the whole statement to which they are attached by giving a warning how they are to be understood, but they do not affect the propositional content, or they do not seem to affect the propositional content of what follows. So luckily she is in town, or happily she is in town, or unfortunately she is in town. What you get as an addressee of that particular sentence is that she is in town and that I find it a happy event or unfortunate event. So the very fact that she is in town is not affected by this sentence adverb. If so, we may conclude that attitudinal sentence adverbs are non-truth conditional, and they are semantically external to the proposition expressed by the utterances that carry them. And now we can proceed to the discussion of evidential adverbials, which are believed to be indicators of the kind or amount of evidence the speaker has for what she is saying. So certainly, probably, possibly, definitely. So these indicate, all of these indicate the extent of the speaker's commitment to the truth of the following proposition. That is, they indicate to what extent the speaker's statement is reliable. Again, they have been traditionally explained or interpreted as non-truth conditional elements, so semantically external to the proposition expressed. As hearsay adverbials constitute a subcategory of evidential adverbials, they have been interpreted along the same lines, that is, as diminishing the speaker's commitment, because if we say apparently, allegedly, reportedly, we indicate that we are not the source of the information ourselves, and the information should be attributed to someone else, which means that we do not take the whole responsibility. So we may say that they indicate the speaker's diminished commitment. So what I presented is the interpretation of sentence adverbs within the speech act theory, and we must say that the Gricean account is very much the same. That is, Grice also regards them as hedges, that is, intensifiers or mitigators that do not contribute to the truth conditional content of the statements that follow this expression, these hedges, but that simply signal the speaker's adherence to the maxims of conversation. Now, this account, perhaps both these accounts, do not answer all possible questions, and there are still some doubts. So here they are. Speech act theories have indiscriminately treated the different types of sentence adverbs. So all sentence adverbs have been regarded as non-truth conditional. So this is the first problem, perhaps. Another question that arises is whether sentence adverbs contribute to the explicit or implicit aspect of communication, because if we believe that if we follow Grice, that there is a distinction only into two levels, that is said and implicated, and the level of said is identified with the truth propositional content, then it seems that there is no place for them, that there is no level of analysis that we can account them for at, because they are not part of the truth conditional content, nor do they represent the implicit meaning. And another question is whether they encode procedural or conceptual information. So here we are back to the distinction that we introduced during our last lecture. If we want to verify the hypothesis that all sentence adverbs constitute a homogeneous group, as they are all non-truth conditional, then perhaps we should apply a test for truth conditionality to all of them and see whether the result of the test is the same for all of them. So let's just perhaps describe a test for truth conditionality. So the standard test for distinguishing truth conditional from non-truth conditional meaning consists in embedding the sentence with a particular element that we want to test for truth conditionality into a conditional to check if it falls within the scope of if. So this time we will embed the sentence with the adverbial into a conditional. But before we do this, perhaps let us just show how the test is applied, and we will check it for but. Okay, so we want to test the word but for truth conditionality. In other words, we want to determine the truth conditional status of but. So the sentence is, Mary is here, but Susan is not here. And as you probably remember, but is believed to be a conventional implicature, which carries a suggestion of contrast. And now the question is whether this suggestion of contrast is truth conditional or not. So we have to answer the question whether the truth conditions of Mary is here but Susan is not here are correctly given in example 1 or in example 2. So example 1, Mary is here, Susan is not here. And example 2, Mary is here, Susan is not here. There is a contrast between the two facts. So now we embed the sentence Mary is here but Susan is not here under if. So the sentence goes like that. If Mary is here but Susan is not, we cannot vote. And now we can ask a question, under what conditions can we not vote? So we cannot vote under the condition that Mary is here and Susan is not here. Or perhaps all three conditions must be satisfied for us to be able to vote, okay? Or not to be able to vote, whatever. Anyway, it seems obvious that we cannot vote only if Mary is here and Susan is not here. The contrast between these two facts is not important, which means that the suggestion of contrast is not truth conditional, because the condition does not depend on this contrast between the two facts. The condition depends only on two separate facts. Mary is here, Susan is not here. But the contrast has nothing to do with that, which means that but is non-truth conditional. So now we can perform the same kind of test for sentence adverbs, and we'll start from attitudinal adverbials such as unfortunately and sadly. So unfortunately Mary has missed the deadline, and sadly Paul's car was stolen. So we start with Mary has missed the deadline. Now unfortunately Mary has missed the deadline can be paraphrased. It is unfortunate that Mary has missed the deadline, or Mary has unfortunately missed the deadline. Okay, they are equivalent. And now we will embed this sentence under the scope of the logical operator if. So if Mary has unfortunately missed the deadline, she can reapply in May. The question is now, under what circumstances Mary can reapply? Is it Mary can reapply in May if she has missed the deadline, or if it is unfortunate that she has missed the deadline? I believe it is obvious to you that Mary can reapply in May only because she has missed the deadline, and whether it is unfortunate or unfortunate does not matter at all, so does not fall under the scope of the logical operator, which means that it does not contribute to the truth conditional to the truth conditions of that particular utterance. One more example of the same procedure performed on an attitudinal adverbial, that is, sadly Polska was stolen. Polska was stolen, it is said that Polska was stolen, Polska was sadly stolen. So if Polska was sadly stolen, he will start using the underground. So again, the question is under what conditions he will start using the underground. So he will start using the underground if his car has been stolen. Okay? Whether it is said or not said does not matter really. So sadly does not contribute to the truth conditions of the utterance, because he's using the underground does not depend on whether it is a sad event or a happy event. So we may conclude that attitudinal sentence adverbs are non-truth conditional, as actually predicted by the interpretation, by the speech act theory interpretation. And now we will proceed to the second category, that is hearsay adverbials, such as allegedly and reportedly. So allegedly the cook has poisoned the soup, and reportedly the bowl was over the line. So allegedly the cook has poisoned the soup can be paraphrased: it is alleged that the cook has poisoned the soup, or the cook has allegedly poisoned the soup. If the cook has allegedly poisoned the soup, the police should make an inquiry. Under what circumstances should the police make an inquiry? And this is a bit more complicated, because if it is alleged that the cook has poisoned the soup, the police in a way is forced to start an inquiry. I hope you understand that. It is, if I say if the cook has poisoned the soup, it may be true or it may not be true, it may be the case or it does not have to be the case, but it is not obliging in any way for the police. But if it is officially alleged that the cook has poisoned the soup, then the inquiry simply must follow, because that's the procedure. If it is alleged, if the cook is officially accused of poisoning the soup, then the inquiry must be started. The police should make an inquiry. So it seems that the police should make an inquiry if it is alleged that the cook has poisoned the soup. So allegedly is truth conditional, because it does contribute to the truth conditions of that proposition, of that statement. It changes the situation in a way, the use of allegedly, because it simply means that the matter is now official, so it cannot be ignored. If I say that the cook has poisoned the soup, the police is obviously not obliged to pay attention to ungrounded accusations. But if it is alleged officially that the cook has poisoned the soup, then there is no other way for the police but to start an inquiry. And now another example of the same kind of a sentence adverb, that is hearsay. Reportedly, the ball was over the line. So it is reported that the ball was over the line. If reportedly the ball was over the line, the matter should be investigated further. And again, under what circumstances should the matter be investigated further? I want you again to notice a difference between sentences without reportedly and with reportedly, because it has been reported, officially again, that the ball was over the line, then the matter should be investigated further, because this is an official accusation or whatever we call it. Okay? If I say the ball was over the line, and then if the ball was over the line, the matter should be investigated further. If I say the ball was over the line, that there are no consequences that do not have. I mean, nobody is somehow obliged to investigate this matter any further, because this may be an ungrounded accusation. But if it has been reported that the ball was over the line, then obviously there are certain authorities that are responsible for sorting it out, which means that reportedly does contribute to the truth conditional content of that utterance, and it is truth conditional. So now, as you can see, hearsay adverbials behave in a different way than predicted by the Speech Act theory interpretation. Now we will test evidential adverbials for truth conditionality, and I will present the stance of relevance theories, of some of relevance theories. I am not convinced myself whether it is so or not, but I will just present it to you. So clearly the driver has died. The driver has clearly died. Obviously the cook will not poison the soup. The cook obviously will not poison the soup. So the driver has died. It is clear that the driver has died. So do they differ in terms of the truth conditional content? That's a question, whether these two sentences are different in terms of the truth conditional content, in the way that the previously discussed sentences were. If the driver has clearly died, you need not hurry for an ambulance. And the question is under what circumstances you shouldn't or you needn't hurry for an ambulance. So relevance theories, some of the relevance theories claim that actually you need not hurry for an ambulance if it is clear that the driver has died, not if the driver has died, but if it is clear that the driver had died, which means that evidential, the consequence of that interpretation is that the evidential sentence adverb clearly is truth conditional. Now, I'm a bit skeptical about it, because it seems to me that we frequently use clearly or obviously as a booster, as an intensifier, so we use it as a hash, in fact, which is not so much indicating, which is, I believe, indicating the strength of our personal belief, but it does not follow that our personal belief represents an absolute truth. So that's why I'm a bit skeptical about that interpretation, but this is what it is like, that evidential adverbials are part of the truth conditional content, so their status is different than the status of attitudinal adverbials. And another example illustrating more or less the same point. Obviously the cook will not poison the soup. So again the question is whether these two sentences, the cook will not poison the soup and it is obvious that the cook will not poison the soup, are different in terms of the truth conditional content. And well, if we say it is obvious that the cook will not poison the soup, perhaps it might be argued that they are. I mean, these two sentences are different, but if we say obviously the cook will not poison the soup, it seems to me again that obviously can be used simply as some kind of booster, so the expression of our personal opinion. But let me perhaps present the interpretation given within relevant theory. So, under what circumstances can we eat the meal without worrying? We needn't worry if it is obvious that the cook will not poison the soup. So they claim here that if I say we needn't worry if the cook will not poison, if the cook does not poison the soup, we needn't worry. We do not know whether he will poison the soup or he will not poison the soup. When it is obvious that he will not poison the soup, then we can be sure. So then, under those circumstances, we do not need to worry. Perhaps I'm not particularly convincing here because I'm not convinced myself, but it seems to me that perhaps in the case of this example, it can be argued that the sentence, it is obvious that the cook will not poison the soup, is different in terms of its truth conditions from the sentence, "The cook will not poison the soup." But mind you that a mild paraphrase of that sentence, like "obviously the cook will not poison the soup," may change matters a bit. And I know that semantically they are equivalent, but still it seems to me that we use "obviously" or "clearly" in a slightly different situation. That it is more of a habit than if I say that it is more a habit than the real semantic meaning that counts. I want to say that perhaps we do not use it according to its semantic value. And finally, the last group of sentence adverbs that is fortunately not particularly problematic, that is illocutionary adverbials. Frankly, John's book has sold very little. John Books has frankly sold very little. And now the question is whether John's books has sold very little is different from, in terms of the truth conditions, from "I tell you frankly that John's books has sold very little." So if John's book has frankly sold very little, you should not be surprised. Under what circumstances shouldn't the hearer be surprised? So you should not be surprised if John's books has sold very little, and not, I mean, the fact that I'm telling you frankly about that or not frankly does not matter at all. So frankly is non-truth conditional. And just one more example, confidentially, Mary has failed the exam. I inform you confidentially that Mary has failed the exam. If Mary has confidentially failed the exam, you mustn't be upset. So under what circumstances must you not be upset? You must not be upset if Mary has failed the exam. Whether I'm telling that confidentially or not, again, does not matter much. So confidentially is non-truth conditional. I presented a relevant theoretic interpretation of sentence adverbs in reference to their truth conditional status, and the conclusion might be that they do not form a uniform group. So some of them are non-truth conditional, whereas others are truth conditional. And now perhaps we can proceed to some other aspects of relevant theoretic interpretation that we haven't discussed so far. So sentence adverbials encode elements of conceptual representations, which may be true or false in their own right, even if they do not contribute to the truth conditions of the utterance in which they occur. So as you can see, we are back to the distinction into conceptual and procedural meaning that we discussed in the course of our previous lecture. And now I would like to show that sentence adverbs, even though they are not part of the truth conditional meaning, represent conceptual meaning. Sentence adverbs contribute to the explicator of an utterance. Now, if they do contribute to the truth conditional content, it will be the base level explicator. If they do not contribute to the truth conditional content, it will be a higher level explicator. So now perhaps I would like to present some arguments in favor of treating sentence adverbs as conceptual encodings. As you know, most ordinary nouns, verbs, adverbs and adjectives which contribute to truth conditions do so by encoding concepts. If we agree that evidentials and hearsay adverbials are truth conditional, then they must be treated as encoding concepts. On the other hand, the relevant theoretic interpretation believes that illocutionary and attitudinal adverbials are non-truth conditional, so we have to answer the question whether they also encode concepts. And relevant theorists believe that they do, because the information conveyed by non-truth conditionals may be denied by the hearer, and we will show that in the following examples. The speaker who uses the illocutionary and attitudinal adverbials can lay herself open to charges on untruthfulness. And remember, illocutionary and attitudinal are non-truth conditional, yet they seem to be conceptual. And look at the examples now. Frankly, this party is boring. You're not being frank. I've seen you dancing with the blonde beauty in blue. So as you can see, what is negated here is not the truth conditional part of that utterance, but the non-truth conditional part. The illocutionary adverb, that is frankly, you're not being frank. Confidentially, Tom broke with Sue. That's not true, you're not being confidential, you've told everyone in the college. Again, what is questioned, what is negated in that sentence is not the statement, the truth conditional part of it, but the illocutionary adverbial. Honestly, I don't care. You're not being honest. I know you've sent her another Valentine this year. So again, notice that it is the non-truth conditional part of that utterance that is negated here. Unfortunately, John lost his job. It is not unfortunate, he got a fellowship in Oxford. So mind you that if it is negated, it means that it must carry a particular concept, because this concept is negated. You're not being honest, you're not being frank, you haven't been confidential. So it is an argument in favor of the interpretation of non-truth conditional adverbs as fully conceptual. And one more example, sadly she missed the deadline. That's not true, no one is sad about it. So the adverbials encode elements of conceptual representations, which can be true or false in their own right, though they do not contribute to the truth conditions of the utterances in which they occur. Another argument in favor of that interpretation is that illocutionary and attitudinal adverbials have synonymous manner adverbial counterparts which are clearly truth conditional. Thus, they encode concepts. Perhaps the following example will make things a bit clearer. So Peter spoke frankly. She fell down very unfortunately. So as you can see here, frankly is not a sentence adverb. It is just an adverb used that modifies a verb in that particular utterance. So it is part of that sentence. It is part of the truth conditional content of that sentence. Peter spoke frankly. And she fell down very unfortunately. Again, unfortunately here modifies the verb. So it is not a sentence adverb. It is not semantically external to the sentence. It is part of it, which means that it is the truth conditional constituent of that sentence. Now, we cannot claim that frankly, in Peter spoke frankly, means something different, I mean a different kind of concept that it does in frankly, I'm surprised. Or that unfortunately, in she fell down very unfortunately, means something different than in does unfortunately, his car was stolen. Obviously, if you compare these sentences, you can see that the concept conveyed is basically the same. So the difference between the truth conditional adverbs and their non-truth conditional counterparts is that the former modify explicit predicates, whereas the latter modify implicit predicates. Peter spoke frankly. Spoke is used explicitly, and frankly modifies spoke. Frankly, this party is boring. Frankly modifies the implicit verb, that is, I'm telling you frankly. Okay? So that's the only difference, but the concept is exactly the same. Unfortunately, he lost his job. So I'm telling, I find it unfortunate. I believe it is unfortunate. It is unfortunately true. But she fell down very unfortunately. The same concept is expressed. And one more argument in favor of interpreting sentence adverbs as representing conceptual meaning. This is compositionality. Perhaps you remember because we discussed compositionality in the course of our previous lecture. So conceptual encodings can be extended. That is, you can insert additional element. So they can be complex, they can be made complex, whereas procedural cannot. You can say in contrast, you can say in total contrast, but you cannot say in total but. So but cannot be extended. So that's the difference between procedural and conceptual encodings. This is called compositionality. As elocutionary and attitudinal adverbials can have a complex syntactic and semantic structure, they must be treated as conceptual encodings. And here are some examples. You may say, frankly, he is a fool, but you may say, quite frankly, he is a fool. You may say, confidentially, he is a fool, but you may say, in strictest confidence, he is a fool. Very sadly and regrettably, the match will be rained off. So you can extend the phrase. And now we are back to this problem that I briefly mentioned before, that is, if non-truth conditional elements are neither part of the set nor of implicit, then where should they be accounted for? And it seems that only relevant theory offers a particular level of analysis for sentence adverbs, and this level, non-truth conditional sentence adverbs, and this level of analysis is a higher level explicature. So higher level explicature, mind you, is the attitude of the speaker, is the speech act, is the intention of the speaker. This is where sentence adverbs can be accounted for. So attitudinal and elocutionary adverbials can be successfully analyzed on the level of higher level explicature. So they can be simply presented as descriptions obtained by optionally embedding the proposition under a speech act or a propositional attitude verb. Higher level explicatures are explicitly communicated but make no contribution to the truth conditions of the proposition. So confidentially, he's got a sack. The base level explicature that is equivalent to the truth conditional content is that he has got a sack. But the higher level is the attitude of the speaker or the speech act description. I'm telling you frankly or confidentially that he's got a sack. If, on the other hand, we decide that evidential and hearsay adverbials are truth conditional, they also encode concepts, obviously, they contribute to the truth conditions of the utterance in the regular way, thus they belong to the base level explicature. So, allegedly, Bill has cheated in the exams. There is just one base level explicature. It is alleged that Bill has cheated in the exams. So that's the view of sentence adverbs within a relevant theoretic interpretation. Thank you for your attention.